My mom told me not to bring my wife to Christmas. She's not really family. I showed up alone, then sent everyone a group text with one attachment, my DNA test. Turns out I'm not her biological son, but the man she never told me about. He was sitting at the table, across from her. So there I was, driving back from my mom's house 3 weeks before Christmas, gripping the steering wheel so tight my knuckles went white. The conversation kept replaying in my head like a broken record. Sarah had been looking forward to her first Christmas with my family for months, picking out gifts, asking what mom's favorite wine was, the whole deal. Then mom drops this bomb on me like it was nothing. She's standing there in her kitchen, wiping down counters that were already spotless, not even looking at me when she says it. Your wife doesn't need to come this year, David. Christmas is for real family. Real family. Like Sarah wasn't real enough after 2 years of marriage, like the ring on her finger was made of plastic. I tried reasoning with her. Asked what the hell she meant by real family. Mom just kept cleaning those damn counters, muttering something about traditions and how some people just don't belong. The way she said it made my stomach turn. Sarah had never done anything wrong, never caused drama, always brought dessert and helped with dishes. But mom had this look in her eyes, this cold distance that started showing up right after our wedding. When I got home, Sarah was wrapping presents on the living room floor, humming some Christmas song. The sight of her there, so happy and innocent, made me want to punch something. How do you tell your wife that your mother thinks she doesn't deserve a seat at the Christmas table? How do you explain that the woman who raised you suddenly turned into someone you don't recognize? I told her anyway. Watched her face crumble like paper in the rain. She didn't cry, just nodded real slow and said she understood. But I could see it in her eyes, that hurt that cuts deep and stays there. That night, she slept facing away from me, and I stared at the ceiling wondering what kind of man lets his mother treat his wife like garbage. The next few days were torture. Sarah pretended everything was fine, but she stopped humming those Christmas songs. Stopped asking about the family dinner. Started working late at the office, coming home exhausted and quiet. I knew she was avoiding the whole situation, and I couldn't blame her. I was doing the same thing. But something was eating at me, something bigger than just mom's attitude. See, this wasn't the first weird thing. Over the past year, mom had been acting strange around Sarah, making little comments that didn't quite make sense. Once she said Sarah reminded her of someone she used to know, someone she'd rather forget. Another time she mentioned how some people bring back memories that should stay buried. Then there were the photos. I'd noticed mom had taken down most of the family pictures that included me as a baby. When I asked about it, she said she was redecorating. But the photos she kept up were all from when I was older, like she was trying to erase the early years. It was subtle, the kind of thing you don't really notice until you start looking for it. The breaking point came on a Tuesday night. I was helping mom clean out her attic, looking for Christmas decorations, when I found a box shoved way back in the corner. Inside were hospital bracelets, baby clothes I'd never seen, and a bunch of letters tied with a rubber band. The return address on the letters made my blood freeze. They were from a law office downtown, dated from around the time I was born. Mom snatched the box away before I could read anything, said it was just old paperwork, nothing important. But her hands were shaking, and she couldn't meet my eyes. That night, I couldn't sleep, kept thinking about those letters, about the look on her face when she grabbed that box. That's when I made the decision that would change everything. I was going to go to Christmas dinner alone, just like mom wanted. But I was also going to bring something else. Something that would finally give me answers to questions I didn't even know I had. I ordered the DNA test kit online that same night. Rush delivery, extra fee, the whole thing. When it arrived, I stared at that little tube for an hour before I worked up the courage to spit in it. Part of me knew I was about to open a door that couldn't be closed, but I was tired of living with secrets that weren't even mine. The results came back faster than expected. I was sitting in my car outside the office, hands trembling as I opened the email on my phone. What I saw there made the world tilt sideways. Made everything I thought I knew about myself crumble into dust. The DNA results were like getting punched in the gut by someone you trusted. According to the genetic analysis, there was a 0% chance that my mother was my biological mother. 0. Not close, not maybe, not possibly adopted. Just 0, like she was a complete stranger who happened to raise me for 32 years. I sat in that parking lot for 2 hours, reading and rereading the results, waiting for them to change. But computers don't lie, and science doesn't care about your feelings. The woman who taught me to ride a bike, who sat up with me when I had nightmares, who made my lunch every day for 12 years, wasn't related to me by blood. But here's where it gets really twisted. The test had found partial matches in the database. Close relatives. People who shared significant DNA with me. And when I clicked on the profiles, I nearly dropped my phone. 3 matches showed up, all with the same last name, Henderson. The same last name as mom's neighbor, the guy who'd been living across the street for as long as I could remember. Frank Henderson. The quiet man who always waved from his porch, who helped Mom with her groceries when Dad was working late, who somehow always seemed to be around during my childhood. The man who knew exactly how I liked my birthday cake, who never missed a single one of my Little League games, who taught me how to change a tire when I turned 16. My hands were shaking so bad I could barely navigate the website. The DNA matches showed Frank had a daughter named Rachel, a son named Tommy, and get this, an unknown son with a genetic profile that matched mine almost perfectly. The timeline made perfect sense. Frank Henderson wasn't just the neighbor. He was my biological father. I drove home in a daze, mind racing with memories that suddenly looked different under this new light. All those times Frank just happened to be there. The way he looked at me sometimes, like he wanted to say something but couldn't. How he always seemed to know things about me that even Mom didn't notice. The man had been watching his son grow up from across the street for 3 decades, pretending to be nothing more than a helpful neighbor. Sarah was waiting for me when I got home, could tell something was wrong the second I walked through the door. I showed her the results, watched her face go through the same shock and confusion I was still processing. She just stared at the screen, then at me, then back at the screen. "This changes everything," she whispered. And she was right. It changed everything about my identity, my family, my entire understanding of who I was. But it also gave me something I'd never had before: leverage. Mom had spent years keeping secrets, manipulating the truth, controlling the narrative. Now I had a truth that could blow up her whole world. The next few days were the longest of my life. I couldn't look at Mom the same way, couldn't pretend I didn't know what I knew. Every conversation felt like acting in a play where I was the only one who knew the real script. She kept calling about Christmas dinner, making sure I was coming alone, making sure Sarah understood she wasn't welcome. I started doing my own investigation, like some amateur detective trying to solve a 30-year-old mystery. Went to the public library, looked up old newspaper archives, birth records, anything I could find from the year I was born. What I discovered made my skin crawl. There had been a scandal that year. A prominent family in town had a teenage daughter who got pregnant. The family was deeply religious, well-respected, the kind of people who couldn't afford that kind of shame. The girl disappeared for several months, and when she came back, there was no baby. No explanation. Just a family who moved on like nothing happened. The girl's name was Patricia Morrison. My mother's maiden name was Patricia Morrison. My biological mother hadn't just hidden me from the world. She'd given me to someone else to raise, someone who could keep the secret safe. And that someone was her best friend from high school, the woman I'd been calling Mom my entire life. The woman who'd agreed to raise another woman's child and never tell a soul the truth. But Frank Henderson knew. He'd always known because he was the father. The married man who'd had an affair with a 17-year-old girl and then watched from across the street as someone else raised his son. The coward who chose his reputation over his child, but couldn't stay completely away. The pieces were falling into place like a jigsaw puzzle from hell. And Christmas dinner was 3 days away. Christmas morning felt like the calm before a hurricane. I woke up early, made coffee, and stared at my phone for 20 minutes before finally typing out the group text message. Added every family member I had numbers for: Mom, my Aunt Linda, my cousins Jake and Miranda, and Frank Henderson. Yeah, I added Frank to the family group chat. Figured it was about time he joined the conversation officially. The message was simple: looking forward to seeing everyone at dinner today. Have something special to share with the family. See you at 3. I attached the DNA test results to the message and hit send before I could change my mind. My phone started buzzing immediately. Mom called 6 times in 10 minutes. I let it go to voicemail every time. Frank called once, hung up when I answered. Aunt Linda sent a text that just said, "What the hell is this?" My cousin Jake sent about 15 question marks in a row. Sarah helped me pick out what to wear, like I was getting dressed for my own execution. She wanted to come with me, said she'd wait in the car, but I told her this was something I had to do alone. Some battles you fight solo, even when you're scared out of your mind. The drive to Mom's house felt like the longest 3 miles of my life. Cars were already in the driveway when I pulled up. Frank's old pickup truck was parked right next to Mom's sedan, like they'd coordinated their arrival. The sight of it made my stomach twist into knots. I sat in my car for 5 minutes, watching the house, trying to imagine what was happening inside. Were they panicking? Planning their defense? Pretending like nothing was wrong? The Christmas lights Mom had strung around the porch looked different somehow, less festive and more like a facade hiding something ugly underneath. When I finally walked through the front door, the silence hit me like a wall. Everyone was there, sitting around the living room like they were waiting for a funeral to start. Mom was in her usual chair, hands folded in her lap, staring at the floor. Frank was on the couch directly across from her, maybe 6 feet away, close enough to touch, but separated by 30 years of lies. Aunt Linda was the first to speak. Her voice came out sharp and accusatory, demanding to know what kind of sick joke I was playing. She waved her phone in the air, said DNA tests were unreliable, that I was trying to hurt the family for no reason. But I could see it in her eyes, that flicker of recognition. She knew something was off, had probably always known. My cousins looked confused more than anything else. Jake kept looking back and forth between Mom and Frank, like he was trying to solve a math problem in his head. Miranda had her arms crossed, defensive, but her expression was curious. These were people I'd grown up with, shared holidays and birthdays and family vacations with, and now they were looking at me like I was a stranger. Frank finally broke his silence. Said my name real quiet, like he was testing how it sounded in his mouth. David. Just that, nothing else. But the way he said it, with this weight behind it, this longing that he'd been carrying for decades. It was the sound of a father saying his son's name for the first time in public. Mom looked up then, and the expression on her face was something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not denial, just this deep, bone-tired exhaustion. Like she'd been holding up a building for 30 years and finally let it collapse. She didn't say anything, just nodded once, real slow, like she was admitting defeat. That's when Jake figured it out. You could see the realization spread across his face like spilled coffee. He pointed at Frank, then at me, then at Mom, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. He said what everyone else was thinking but afraid to say out loud. Frank is David's real dad? The words hung in the air like smoke from a gun. Frank's face went red, then white, then red again. Mom closed her eyes and took a deep breath that seemed to last forever. And I just stood there in the doorway, watching 30 years of secrets finally come into the light. But here's the thing that made my blood turn to ice. When Mom opened her eyes again, she wasn't looking at me or Frank. She was looking at the Christmas tree, at an ornament I'd never noticed before. A small silver frame with a photo inside. And when I followed her gaze, when I really looked at that picture, the world tilted sideways again. It was a photo of a teenage girl holding a baby. The girl looked exactly like me, same eyes, same nose, same stubborn chin. And written on the back of the frame, in Mom's handwriting, were the words Patricia and David, 1991. My biological mother. The woman who'd given birth to me and then disappeared. She wasn't some distant figure from the past. She was right there in the room with us, had been there my entire life. The woman I'd been calling Aunt Linda, Mom's sister, was actually my real mother. The room exploded. Everyone started talking at once, voices rising, accusations flying. But all I could hear was my own heartbeat pounding in my ears as I stared at the woman who'd given birth to me, who'd watched me grow up calling someone else Mom, who'd played the role of loving aunt while keeping the biggest secret in the world. The next hour felt like being trapped inside a tornado made of family secrets and 30 years of lies. Linda, my biological mother, finally broke down and confessed everything. The words came pouring out of her like water through a broken dam, and each revelation hit harder than the last. She'd been 17 when she got pregnant. Frank Henderson was 25, married with a new baby of his own, working as the youth pastor at their church. Yeah, you heard that right. The man who'd been my neighbor, my secret father, had been in a position of authority when he got a teenage girl pregnant. The whole thing was a scandal wrapped in a crime wrapped in a betrayal. Linda's parents, my grandparents, had threatened to disown her if anyone found out. The family's reputation in their small religious community meant everything to them. They couldn't have their daughter branded as a homewrecker, and they sure as hell couldn't let anyone know she'd been involved with a married church leader. So they made a deal with the devil. Mom, who'd been Linda's older sister and best friend, had been trying to get pregnant for years with no success. She agreed to take the baby, raise it as her own, and never tell anyone the truth. In exchange, Linda would play the role of the loving aunt, stay involved in my life, but never claim her real relationship to me. Frank would transfer to another church in a different town, but somehow ended up moving right across the street from us 5 years later. The whole arrangement was insane, but it worked for 3 decades. I grew up thinking I had a normal family, never questioning why Aunt Linda was around so much, why she seemed to know exactly what I was thinking before I said it, why she got more emotional than anyone else at my graduation, my wedding, every major moment in my life. But here's where the story gets really twisted. Frank didn't just accidentally end up as our neighbor. He'd orchestrated the whole thing. Bought the house across the street specifically to be close to his son. Spent 30 years playing the helpful neighbor while secretly being my father, watching me grow up from a distance, never able to claim me, but unable to stay away completely. And the woman I'd called Mom? She'd spent 3 decades raising her sister's illegitimate child, pretending to be happy about it, but growing more resentful every year. That's why she'd been so hostile toward Sarah. My wife represented everything Mom had given up, the chance to have her own biological family, her own legacy, her own blood carrying on the family name. When Sarah got pregnant last month, news we hadn't shared with anyone yet, Mom must have sensed something was changing. The DNA test results confirmed her worst fears, that I'd eventually figure out the truth, that her role as my mother would be exposed as a lie, that she'd lose the only child she'd ever raised to the people who were my real biological parents. The room went dead silent when Linda finished her confession. Frank was crying, actual tears streaming down his face as he looked at me with this mixture of love and regret that was heartbreaking to watch. Mom, the woman who'd raised me, just sat there staring at her hands like she'd aged 20 years in the past hour. But I wasn't done, not even close, because there was one more secret that needed to come out, one final revelation that would change everything yet again. I pulled out my phone and showed them the other DNA match I'd found, the one I hadn't mentioned in my group text, a match that showed I had a half-sister, someone who shared Frank as a father but had a different mother, someone who'd been living in the same town her entire life, working at the same hospital where I'd been born, completely unaware that her biological father lived 3 streets away. Her name was Victoria Chun, and she was a nurse in the maternity ward, the same nurse who'd delivered my first child 6 months ago, the same woman who'd held my daughter, smiled at me, and said she looked just like her daddy. My half-sister had delivered my daughter, and neither of us had any idea we were related. Frank's face went completely white. Apparently, Victoria was the result of another affair, this one with a nurse at the hospital where his wife had been getting cancer treatment. The man had a pattern of cheating on his wife with younger women, leaving a trail of illegitimate children across town. Children who'd grown up not knowing each other, not knowing him, scattered like seeds from a tree that never acknowledged its own fruit. The final bombshell came when Frank admitted there might be others. More children, more secrets, more lives built on lies and half-truths. He'd been living as this respectable neighbor, this helpful community member, while his biological children were scattered across the county, raised by other people, unaware of their real connections to each other. Christmas dinner was never served. By 6 o'clock, everyone had left except me, Mom, and Linda. We sat in the living room as darkness fell outside, 3 people trying to figure out how to move forward after everything we thought we knew had been destroyed. Mom looked at me with tears in her eyes and said the words I'd been waiting 32 years to hear. "I'm sorry, David. I'm sorry I kept this from you, and I'm sorry I took it out on Sarah. You deserved to know the truth, and she deserved to be treated like family." Linda reached over and touched my hand, the first time she'd ever touched me as my mother instead of my aunt. Her voice broke when she told me she'd thought about confessing 1,000 times over the years, but she'd been afraid of losing me completely. Afraid that if I knew the truth, I'd hate her for giving me away, hate Mom for lying to me, hate Frank for being a coward. The consequences of that Christmas revelation rippled through our family like an earthquake. Frank's wife found out about Victoria and immediately filed for divorce. Victoria learned she had a half-brother and decided to build a relationship with me and my daughter. My cousins Jake and Miranda had to reckon with the fact that their aunt was actually their cousin's mother, that their family tree was more like a family pretzel. Sarah and I made the decision to move across the country 6 months later. Not to run away from the truth, but to start fresh somewhere new, somewhere we could build our own family traditions without the weight of 30 years of secrets pressing down on us. We invited both Linda and Mom to visit, establishing new relationships based on honesty instead of lies. Frank tried to reach out several times, wanting to build a relationship with me and his granddaughter. But I wasn't ready for that. Maybe someday, but not yet. Some wounds need time to heal before you can even think about forgiveness. The strangest part of the whole ordeal was how normal everything felt once the truth was out. Linda was still Linda, just now she was Linda my mother instead of Linda my aunt. Mom was still the woman who'd raised me, loved me, sacrificed for me, even if we weren't related by blood. Frank was still the neighbor who'd taught me to change a tire. Just now I understood why he'd been so invested in making sure I learned it right. Victoria and I started having dinner once a month, sharing stories about our childhood, comparing notes about Frank's weird habits and mannerisms that we'd both inherited. It was surreal, discovering I had a sister who'd been living parallel life just a few miles away, someone who understood parts of me that I'd never been able to explain to anyone else. But the biggest consequence was the most unexpected one. Sarah's pregnancy, the one we'd kept secret through all the Christmas drama, resulted in twin boys. And when they were born, Victoria was the nurse on duty. My half-sister delivered my sons, just like she'd delivered my daughter. Some connections transcend secrets and lies, finding ways to bring families together even when the truth has been buried for decades. Those twins are 3 years old now, and they know the whole story. Age-appropriate version, obviously, but they know that Grandma Linda is also Mommy's mommy, that Grandma Patricia raised Daddy, but isn't his biological mom, that Aunt Victoria is Daddy's sister who helped bring them into the world. They think it's perfectly normal to have a complicated family tree, because that's all they've ever known. Looking back, I realized that Christmas dinner was the best gift I ever received, even though it felt like the worst day of my life when it was happening. The truth, no matter how messy and painful, is always better than living a lie. And family, real family, isn't just about blood and DNA. It's about the people who choose to love you, support you, and stick around even when everything falls apart. Frank Henderson died 2 years later, never having built the relationship with me that he'd wanted. But Victoria spoke at his funeral, and so did I. We talked about the man who'd been too afraid to claim his children, but too much of a father to abandon them completely. It wasn't forgiveness, exactly, but it was understanding. Sometimes that's the best you can do. And that's the story. If you're still here, that means you're one of us. So go ahead, hit that subscribe button. I drop new chaos every single day, and trust me, tomorrow's story, it's even worse than this one.